Good morning. How many of you in the audience, having heard about Discovery Boat, have been on it and enjoyed it? Look at that. I have this thought that we have an alumni group for colleges, universities, schools. We have a Discovery Boat alumni group. And what a privilege it is for me to spend 2 hours on Glen Lake on a pontoon to talk about what's special about our watershed. We know that it's not bulletproof. It needs monitoring. It needs careful care. And all of us are going to be involved in that process of taking care of it. Take a look at this slide. Anybody know what the age of that pontoon boat is? It's got a square canopy. It's got fringe around the rim of the canopy. This is a 1970 float boat before the word pontoon came to be. I thought that would be fun. Since we're talking about nostalgia, 80 years of being an association, 30 years of being in the boat wash business, this is an appropriate slide, don't you think? We have really been put on alert, scary alert, with the prospects of Little Glen being taken over by an invasive plant called Eurasian water milfoil. And this plant spreads like wildfire. All it needs to do to spread is to fragment. And this time of year, in July, August, it's when it does all the fragmenting. And those fragments drift across the lake, and already they have roots ready to go. And when they land on even native vegetation under the water, they will take over and they will outcompete the native plants. So our focus, rightly so, was on Eurasian water milfoil. It's also called EWM. And so we also have other invasives. We have them on the shoreline and we have them in the water. Fortunately, we have only one other aquatic invasive plant, and that's on Brooks Lake, which is connected to Big Glen, which is why we're there looking at it. It's curly leaf pondweed, and the way we get rid of that is by hand pulling. We also, around the shoreline, have terrestrial or land-based invasives, which if we don't take care of them, will take over. And not as maybe as aggressive as EWM, but it's the kind of stuff that spreads and it outcompetes the native plants, and we do not want them. So we typically dig them out, but there's one species that we have to spray, the Phragmites, to get rid of it. I'd like to shout out a big, huge thank you to Laurel Varan. I don't think she's here today, but she's one of our subcontractors. And this is her and Emma looking at the shoreline from a boat, doing surveys. And what they do is they look for the blooming time of these plants that we don't want. Yellow iris, purple loosestrife, and Phragmites and coltsfoot. These are the ones that have to get off our shoreline. And we spend a fair amount of time with Laurel mapping them and then going back, and each person who has this growing on their shoreline has to agree for us to dig them out and eradicate them. This is an aerial drone picture of 4 boats. And let me go through the boats, and then in the middle you'll see a couple scuba divers, and if you can squint your eyes, I wish it were darker in this room, but there's a lighter spot in the middle of these 4 boats. I'll start with the boat at the bottom of the screen. That is a company called Zero Gravity. We've been working with them since 2017. A guy by the name of Dennis Lyon works on at least 40 different water bodies around northern Michigan. He really knows the people in lake associations. He's an incredible resource for us, and he flies the drones both above the water at 300 feet, and he also has a co-pilot, Sean, who does the underwater ROV work, where we get a good first-hand look of what's under the water. So he's in boat number 1. If we go around clockwise, We're going to go up to the top. That's Ron Rymick. He owns a company called Freshwater Solutions. And thankfully, he has been working at Lake Leelanau for the past 5 or 6 years. And he's really the shoulders that we're standing on today to try to get rid of EWM. He has learned so much. They've made all the mistakes, and we have not had to make those mistakes. And we went straight to the colonies and took care of them with what we call benthic barriers, which is essentially a bottom cloth made out of burlap. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The boat at the very top is myself on the RV Sarah, along with Laura Wiesen. We were ready to put the buoys in after the work was done so that we would make sure that if people were boating around the treated areas, we would not have somebody dropping an anchor and then pulling it up. And can you imagine the burlap blanketing this Eurasian water milfoil being pulled up? So we didn't want to damage all the hard work that we invested in. And then on the far right at roughly 3 o'clock is the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa Chippewa Indians, known as GTB. And a guy by the name of Dan Mays is the head of that water quality division. And thankfully, he was allowing the tribe to have jurisdiction to be permitting our operations, because you can't just go and put a benthic barrier down anywhere at your own will. You have to have a permit. Typically, the state will provide those permits, but we chose the band. And I want to thank the legal team headed up by Dick O'Malley. And Dick, if you could stand up. This guy helped us do all the navigating. I mean, you can't imagine the number of hours we spent trying to navigate getting a permit to do this. Nonetheless, we were able to get it, and the operations moved forward. And in the middle, they, at Lake Leelanau, they have like 6 or 7 divers. We got the best 2 divers they had on their team to come to Glen Lake. And they put that barrier down as seamlessly as could be. It was a poetry in motion. Is that a fair statement? So we need to continue to go beyond Little Glen. We have other lakes. And so the next potential lake for harboring an EWM colony would be Fisher Lake. And so we identified with a high flyover of the drone 17 different spots where we wanted to go down with the ROV and check to see if we had any trouble in those areas. And so we also had one spot in Brooks Lake, believe it or not, that we wanted to check, because remember, Brooks Lake is connected to Big Glen. And so we're in that process right now. I am waiting at this moment for all the underwater video. And I want to tell you that not only do we look for EWM, but we're also looking at all the other native plants at each of these sites. And we are cataloging the rich biodiversity of Glen Lake, because that is going to be one of those ways that we can protect ourselves with healthy aquatic gardens, with native plants. So even though EWM is aggressive and it outcompetes the natives, the first defense against this, if we're going to see a floating fragment, is to have a lot of existing plants that are in good shape. And we're also going to have to go back and relook at Little Glen, because you know what, folks? We can't stop looking. And that's going to be kind of our modus of operandi from now on. We're going to have to keep looking and looking and looking and hoping to not find what we're looking for. So this is an aerial view of a Big and Little Fisher. It shows the sites. You can see where the spots are, is that where the darkened area of the bottom is. And you know, why go look for EWM where you have no plants growing? You might as well look where there is a place where these plants can root and grow. I want to also now pivot to a practice we've been doing since 2017. We did our first shoreline survey, which is, again, using Dennis Wyan and his drone technology. And when we fly over the shoreline, we are embracing the idea, and I want to see a show of hands. How many of you think the most critical part of our watershed is the shoreline. Would you agree with that? Yeah, because if you live further afield and you're doing something that might pollute the lake, there's distance from the shoreline and the water. So the people who live on the shoreline have a critical role in protecting the water. And so what do we look for is, here's a list of things that we catalog, number, and statistically report. And the cool thing about this is that this shoreline survey practice has grown to 12 different lakes, all doing the same thing that Glen Lake first did back in 2017. So what does that allow us to do? We can now compare Glen Lake to 12 other lakes in terms of what we call the best management practices. And there is a scoring method that we use. And when we look at Glen Lake, you can just imagine we're at the top of the list when it comes to being the most protective for water quality. And I think all of you need to give yourselves a pat on the back right now, right? Everybody do that? Yeah. So the best way to protect our water quality is a natural shoreline. Obviously, if you have a home on a property, you can't do what is shown in this picture, but this is the idea of what it takes for water to be the best it can be. And so we promote the natural shoreline. We also take a look at the water coming into the lake. We know that rain comes down and fills the water in the lake. We also have groundwater, springs come in and fill the lake. We also have little places along the shoreline where we have at least a creek, which is what we only have on Glen Lake is one creek, Hatlam Creek, that comes in and feeds the lake from a surface water perspective. But we also have other places where we monitor it. And what we tend to look for is a system of conductivity where the middle of the lake has a certain reading. And we think that if the water coming in is the same as the middle of the lake, we're not having an adverse impact on the water quality from an inlet perspective. So that's one of the things we've been doing in it. We've been doing it for 10 years. One of the things I like to say is that a long-term study is far more valuable than a one-off study. So we got to keep going back to these places, looking at the numbers, checking the trends, and then being able to stand up after 10 years and say, this is the way it is. And we were finding that the inlets are in good shape. And that's because they drain land that's protected by the national park and by people who really know how to protect our water quality. This is a map that shows, and if you look at the yellow pins of where we do that inlet study. And then I want to update you on the koi. You've heard of the storylines from 2 years ago. We had Japanese koi, came from a private pond, and somebody let the fish in the lake. They didn't want to let them, go to somewhere else, so they let them into Glen Lake. And they now have been there at least 6 years, we think. Last year, we were very successful with bow fishermen to get them out of the lake. And this year we were not as successful. We did not line up the arrow with the fish. And so we were short on getting them out of the lake. But this photograph, thanks to Kara Cassard on the south shore of Little Glen, she got her camera out, and we know that we have at least one more koi in the lake, and maybe more, but at least one. There's the photograph, and they have markings. And so we are going to be looking at them in year 3 of our program to try to reduce or eliminate the koi in our lake. We're getting help from the DNR on this, and we got approval to do it, and we're going to keep going after it. I think it's probably safe, the 20 years that I've been giving the State of the Watershed addresses, that I have to talk about swimmer's itch, right? So we do have it. You probably have got family members that have encountered the swimmer's itch. Just let me recap sort of the history of the last 50 years. Number one, we can't put copper sulfate in the water anymore. It's illegal. There was a definitive study that the DNR embraced that says that it's ineffective, it doesn't work. You'll still have swimmer's itch because the snails produce eggs that then hatch into baby snails. And that all comes after you just treated an area. So We can't use it, it's illegal. We've tried it before, it didn't work. We also abandoned the trapping of mergansers, and the reason is that we found that mallards and Canada geese also harbor itch-causing worms. So we have 3 different species of itch-causing worms, and they all harbor different snails. So the idea of trying to get all these birds off the lake to stop the life cycle is impossible. So we also know that the trapping program I know Crystal Lake was trying to use this program because they don't have 3 species of snail itch-causing worms. They only have 1, so they thought they have the silver bullet. But it turns out the state has turned down the trapping and relocating because of avian flu. So their permit doesn't even work anymore. And so, it's really down to the swimmer, right? I mean, where else can we go if we think about the process of where we are today? And on our website, and we have handouts that talk about prevention is the key. And I, being one who's in the water a lot, doing work for you, the Glen Lake Association, I can navigate 99 times out of 100 my swims and not get itch. And you just got to know when to go, where to go, and you can swim all day long. I can also tell you, in December, we never had an itch case reported ever. I think that's my end point. Any questions will be handled at the end of the meeting. I think Stan will talk about that. Stan, you can come back up and take over. Thank you.